Ich freue mich, dass Sie so zahlreich erschienen sind. Ja, I am delighted to see so many of you here today. I would like to warmly welcome you to the kickoff event of the proHolz Student Trophy, the international wood construction competition. To all participants, all students, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. This is now the 5th time that we have held this competition for students. The companies overseeing the awards are proHolz Austria and proHolz Bavaria. This time, we are of course dealing with the city again. And as your challenge, we have selected 3 very interesting building projects for you in Vienna. For example, our school building expansion project, which addresses a common issue in our cities. There is a great need for both housing and accompanying infrastructures such as schools. Building site 1 is an extension of an existing school. The existing structure dates from the early 20th century. We then have building site 2, an extension to the edge of a block. This will then be a residential development that must be sensitive to the surrounding urban stock. It will be a new building, but it will have to fit into the edge of the block. We also have an intriguing addition of stories to an existing building as building site 3. This is a historic industrial building. These were factory work floors. The existing building is still used and highly sought after. It will need an addition of at least 2 stories in wood construction. Why are we doing all this? We can see the problems we are facing, especially in our metropolises and cities, and are on the search for solutions. Wood construction offers solutions. We are confronted with climate change, rapid consumption of resources, and the sealing of ground and soil surfaces. Perhaps sealing is also a key word. We have all felt this firsthand. Heat islands, heat events that are becoming more intense, heavy rain. As planners, we must increasingly take all of this into account in the future and find the appropriate answers, especially in urban conglomerates and metropolitan areas. We have an incredibly high need for housing. The city of Vienna recently cracked the 2 million inhabitants mark, far ahead of the forecasted time. There are, of course, aware forecasts. The city of Vienna, like other cities, is experiencing a very rapid population growth. As you probably already know, the construction tasks are all described in detail on our website, so you can already start working on them. I assume most of you have already started your design project as well. I would like to thank everyone who supported us in the preparation, financing and development of this fantastic competition, namely the Institute of Architecture and Design at the Vienna University of Technology, the chair of Professors Stauffer and Hasler, who gave us loads of good tips, and the endowed chair for design and timber construction in urban space, occupied since October the 1st by Professor Juri Treu. We are very happy and proud that the Vienna University of Technology now also has a dedicated chair for timber construction. The subject is extremely current and is very future-orientated. I would like to thank my colleagues in the various countries, as the competition is international. It is held in Italy, Southeastern Europe, Poland, Germany, and of course Austria. I would like to thank all of those who support the competition and are also their contact persons. You can contact these colleagues at any time. The contact details, along with my contact details, since I am responsible for the competition at proHolz Austria, can be found on the website. A very sincere thanks goes to our partner companies and sponsors, whose financial contribution makes the competition possible. These are all renowned companies from the timber industry, from the manufacturing sector as well as the executing sector. They are world leaders. The largest companies are located in Central Europe, Austria, Bavaria, and also the rest of Germany. These are our sponsors. They are linked on the website and can provide valuable information also online. So it's worth having a read there. We have also brought some documents with us today. Feel free to have a browse so you can read up on wood construction and the solutions that are offered. Let's now come to today's agenda. There are two introductory addresses to start with. One is by Richard Strahls, the chairman of proHolz Austria and CEO of proHolz, one of the leading timber construction companies worldwide, a major producer of cutting-edge wood products. Cross-laminated timber is absolutely en vogue. And the other one by Alexander Gump. Alexander Gump is the chairman of proHolz Bavaria, the second awarding body of the competition. So there is proHolz Austria and proHolz Bavaria, two sister companies. Alexander Gump comes from the executing sector and is the owner and chairman of Gump Meyer, a very big player in timber construction in Bavaria. First of all, I would like to ask Richard Strahls to say a few words of welcome as we officially kick off the proHolz Student Trophy. Thank you. I would like to welcome you all on behalf of proHolz Austria. I can also say that I am very, very proud of how many of you are here today and how many different nations and universities will be represented in what is now our fifth proHolz Student Trophy. Why did we launch the Student Trophy? I think almost 10 years ago. In the wood industry, we see that there is an issue, that we need knowledgeable people who know how to work with wood, how to plan and design. We also need knowledgeable people to do the maths, and then we need good construction companies. And we have recognized that it is very difficult to find really well-trained timber architects across Europe, as well as all the civil engineers who can also handle wood in structural design. And that's when the idea was born to instill in you, dear students, the idea that wood is a sustainable material and we should use it as such. The proHolz Student Trophy aims to encourage interdisciplinary teams of architects and civil engineers to work together on these tasks. As Ms. Weger has already correctly said, the cities are growing, and cities are growing rapidly. Vienna, with 2 million inhabitants, is now one of the 5 largest cities in Europe. Housing is needed, and we all know that the issue of soil sealing is, of course, something we can't take lightly. And this is where wood comes into play. Wood has excellent properties, as you know, such as low weight and immense strength, and very high scope for prefabrication. If the work is done well, construction sites in inner city areas can be completed with little noise, little transport and a short time frame. And you are challenged here with 3 great construction tasks that represent the theme of our time. The tasks involve the challenge of adding stories to buildings, subsequent densification, filling gaps, and the very important topic of schools, kindergartens and education centers. These tasks have been put together with Professor Hasler's Institute, and they are each, I believe, very challenging. We are all delighted that so many of you are here today to accept the challenges. Above all, we are extremely excited about the project that we will then be presented with next May, and I know that the jury is already looking forward to seeing and evaluating all these projects. And yes, there will of course be a winner. With this in mind, good luck to you all and thank you for taking part. Thank you, Mr. Stralz. I would like to emphasize once again, it is a pleasure to see that students, supervisors and participants from so many different countries are here today. I would also like once again to underline that you will be planning a timber construction together, cross-discipline. That's why we specified in the competition that teams of at least 2 planners must be formed. That's the way it is in wood construction. I would now like to ask Alexander Gumm for a few words of welcome. Dear Chairman Richard Stralz, dear Ms. Bayer Online, dear Professor Treu, ladies and gentlemen, dear students. First of all, I would like to express my sincere thanks for the many years of trust and cooperation between proHolz Bavaria and proHolz Austria, as we see again today in this wonderful competition, the Student Trophy 24. Thank you also for the invitation to Vienna today. I bring you warm greetings from the Bavarian stakeholders of the entire forestry and timber industry. Richard Stralz has already said that climate protection as one of the central challenges of our time is an important driver for timber construction, not only in Austria but also in Germany. We can now build almost everything in wood, so that every builder should and must themselves the question, why not build in wood? And now please allow me a short deviation from the script. Because there are so many students here, I actually expect a lot more builders today and fewer students. Let me take the opportunity to tell you that we are an executing company. We get many requests from builders and architects for basic consulting. We need you, freshly trained architects and engineers, to acquire and be taught the basic knowledge of timber construction. I would also like to emphasize again the importance of basic knowledge. If one can do basic multiplication tables, then they can quickly add up to much larger numbers. Please, that is the appeal I am making at this point. In this way, you relieve the stress on us, the executing companies, and you are very important partners in your offices, because knowledge of timber construction is not growing as fast as the number of timber buildings. This positive development, and now I'm getting back to the point, is due to the rapid progress and professionalization that modern timber construction has undergone in the last 20 years. With serial and circular construction, it already offers cost, resource and climate-friendly benefits and thus progressive construction methods. This is also due in particular to the educational and research institutions, such as the Technical University of Munich and the Technical University of Rosenheim in Bavaria or the Technical University of Vienna here. And that is why I and all of us at proHolz Bavaria are pleased to be partners in this competition, because knowledge transfer and training are essential for us. In the Student Trophy competition, young people can contribute their ideas, knowledge, passion and motivation to meet this demand. I would like to offer you all some advice. Stay tuned and keep your commitment to climate-smart wood construction. And besides, you're the next generation who will have to deal with this world we've left you, and you have a chance to change it. Special thanks are due to the responsible and sustainable forestry, as is practiced here in Central Europe. This is because it creates the conditions for climate-protecting timber construction in the first place. However, in order for the forestry and wood sectors to assume their intended key role of effectively reducing emissions, there is no need for further bans on use, but rather a consistent strengthening of wood use and the development of climate-resistant forests. As paradoxical as it sounds, we will have to fell significantly more spruce in the next few years to be able to create climate-resistant forests. Let me conclude by saying that I am convinced that the most important thing for the acceptance of timber construction are high-quality buildings that people like and use, quality and urban design. For this we need you, dear students. I wish all participants good luck in the competition and, above all, many new insights and lots of fun whilst doing the work. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Gump. Ich wollte da noch einmal kurz einhaken. Wir geben ja seit vielen Jahren die
Thank you very much, Mr. Gump. I just wanted to chime in here for a second. We have been publishing the very renowned Zuschnitt magazine on modern timber construction for many years now. You probably all know it. You can also receive a free subscription through the website proHolz.at. I just wanted to say, first of all, because the question is asked so often that we have enough wood for timber construction. We can build much more, and the forests will not suffer any damage because new wood will always grow in our forests. Secondly, the next issue of Zuschnitt deals very explicitly and in depth with the issues of forestry, forests, wood supply and wood, providing answers to any questions you might have on these matters. I will now move on to a keynote presentation on the wooden city, on wood fundamentally in our cities. The presentation will be made by Juri Troy. Juri Troy is an architect who studied architecture in Innsbruck and at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna, and has held the chair for design and timber construction in urban space since October the 1st here at the Technical University of Vienna, and since 2020 in Stuttgart, the professorship for climate-friendly and resource-conserving architecture. He has architectural offices in Vienna and Bregenz. Professor Troy, we look forward to hearing what you have to say about wood construction and wood in the city. The floor is all yours. Thank you very much for the introduction and good day to everybody. I am very happy to see so many of you here today. We are almost bursting at the seams. That is really nice to see. I would like to welcome everyone to the Technical University Vienna, my new home, well, my academic home, for the last 2 weeks. We are still just settling in here with our research team, with my 2 assistants. I'm actually probably the greenest person here, at least in terms of length of service. I'm also extremely pleased that we're here in a room so full of people who are interested in finding solutions in anticipation of what we're undertaking here. So all the models here are very important to me in my work. We also work a lot with physical models in the office, and it is my intention that we practice this here at the Technical University Vienna, because I believe that working with the material and on these different scales creates the greatest benefit to our own experience, and we can actually pass on these experiences in the best possible way. A model is a wonderful medium. Not only can you experiment with it yourself, but you are constantly learning how much room for interpretation such models have. Just yesterday we sat together in this room and saw 20 different solutions based on one set task. And it's so nice to talk about the variety of our creative possibilities. our creativity, and how that suddenly opens up spaces and suddenly you're able to break out of the given structures. So that's what I want to continue to do so. What is also important to me is that the teaching has a very strong practical orientation. We have already heard that there is a very strong increase and a very strong demand for timber construction planning and timber construction projects. In the meantime, we have an incredibly large number of technical options for implementing timber construction projects. But of course, we also need the people who are able to plan that and really plan in such a way that it is planned using the specific material. That means it doesn't make sense to simply design and then say afterwards, yes, okay, but you could have also planned that in wood. That is definitely the wrong approach. We must learn to start with the material, to find new solutions from the material, and to adapt those solutions to our questions in a modern context. I have the honor of briefly introducing the topic, which I've done in a very general way. We are studying this topic in two groups of students. In our first week here at the Technical University, we were already on site looking at the building sites. Very exciting projects, very challenging. And for those who haven't been there yet, take a close look. Every project has its difficulties. I believe every project has the potential to produce a beautiful, unique solution. We took a look on site. It was exactly during the only 3 hours of rain in the last 30 days. We were all soaking wet afterwards. But it is possible for you to get there quite quickly, so please take the opportunity. I won't say anything else about the competition. My colleague Katharina Bayer will do that afterwards. I would like instead to talk a little bit about what this topic means for us and where we are at the moment and to what extent we as architects now have the responsibility to respond to the situation accordingly. With this competition, we are in a city which has a very long building tradition, a long history which has had very different phases of development, a city in which the culture of building has expressed itself in very different ways and in which this architecture was also an essential part of the way of thinking during these times in which it was created. There were, of course, also huge upheavals. You can see that in these structures, how cities like this change. Architecture responds to the circumstances. Right now, we are again in a phase in which massive change is taking place. Social change and demographic change. Now we are again being challenged to find new answers to this. What is beautiful about Vienna is that these changes and these traces have been left in the city can be seen very easily. These structures that have been left to us very often tell of a building culture, a very highly developed building culture and the time in which they were built and the possibilities that people had for building at that time. If you travel through the city, you have the opportunity to really draw from your full surroundings and find things in every possible corner that can greatly inspire you and also guide you. Even today, I'm convinced of that. And if one is able to read the language of this built environment, I believe one is able to find the answers to it also in our present time. That takes a certain amount of time. It takes a certain amount of experience and a certain amount of reading. But out of that, you then develop your own language. And with that language, you are in turn able to give your own answers and, in the best case, write texts. Texts in architectural terms, which then, of course, in the best case, also contain this poetry and are not there just to pass on information. We have already heard today that Vienna has recently exceeded the 2 million inhabitants mark again. Here we can see the historical development of the population since around 1800. And you can see how rapid this development was back then. A little more than 100 years ago, Vienna was one of the largest cities not only in Europe as it is now, but also in the world, and had to deal with this rapid growth, which of course brought many social difficulties with it. Problems with hygiene, etc., but also structural issues to which answers had to be found. One can imagine that if change takes place at such a rapid pace over such a long period of time, then there is a corresponding need for answers as to how these changes can take place in the built environment. You all know these photographs of the construction sites at the time. Nowadays, it is hard to imagine the scale at which this construction took place, and with very simple technical means. Yes, there were more or less conventional construction methods used at the time. But, and this is not so obvious today when you walk through this city, in addition to bricks, of course, a lot of wood was used even back then, because it is simply a very suitable choice of building material, because it is widely available, because there was the knowledge of how to handle it, and because it could be used very sensibly and functionally. And so, at the time, a building culture developed that also applied a certain set of standards, whereby everyone who carried out the trade knew what was required of them. This was the only way it could be at all possible to build these huge numbers of structures in such a short time. It was essential to know that if there is a window here and this opening is provided in a plan, then everybody knows how to brick up this wall. And everybody knows how an inserted window has to look. It was possible to build an entire building with relatively few specifications. If we look today at the construction plans from the time, then we will see that they only contain a fraction of the information contained in today's construction plans. At the same time, however, construction worked much better back then. That is just how it is. Why? Quite simply because each person involved knew exactly what was required from them. Anyone who built a window was only able to do so not just because they knew about the window, but also knew how the related trades worked so that the window would fit correctly in the end. And the same happened with every staircase, with every railing, with every roof truss, with every foundation, and so on. And I can tell you this from my own practical experience, that this interlinked knowledge cannot be taken for granted today. Not only from the planning side, but also in many designs. We are in the fortunate position in Austria that we now have very good timber construction companies, supplier companies, etc. This has happened in the last 20 years, in some areas even longer ago. But with the subsequent trades, by which I mean anyone who comes after the structure is completed, the knowledge is simply lacking. So you could easily have an electrician arrive at a construction site with a Hilti drill and want to drill holes through an exposed wood ceiling. Yes, I could fill several presentations with the fails I have witnessed. Briefly, a few words about the possibilities of timber construction and some historical considerations. Recently, a roof truss cadastre of Vienna's first district was compiled. I find this totally awesome. Someone just came in and physically recorded all the roof trusses of the first district. Plans of them were drawn, photos were taken, documentation was made, up to the analysis of the wood, how old it is, and of course, concluding from that, when the roof trusses were made. This is an example of it. This is the roof truss of the Maltese church. During the research, it was found that it was erected in 1312, and the wood used there was already 200 years old. This means 900-year-old wood still makes up this roof truss and has been perched on this building for 700 years and still fulfills its function. This proves the durability of wood. I was lucky to grow up in a Rhine Valley house in Vorarlberg, which is now exactly 240 years old and still functions perfectly. Yes, you just have to design and build it accordingly, and then wood is actually capable of maintaining its function over a long period of time. Except in cases where this is then prevented for whatever reason. And then it suddenly becomes very apparent that wood was used everywhere. This is the sort of a photo that you see very often in Vienna these days. And you can see that this was not a dilapidated house per se, and it was inhabited until the very end, but this house had the misfortune of being only 2 stories high in an area where you can build 6 to 7-story houses nowadays. That is why it was demolished and is now being replaced by something very cheap. So the reason why it was demolished was certainly not because of a failing of the wood.
Wenn man sich das anschaut, und ich lebe jetzt seit 25 Jahren in dieser Stadt, dann ist das tatsächlich eine riesige Zerstörung an.
If you look at it now, and I've been living in the city for 25 years now, there is really a huge destruction of building stock taking place here. I have to say, in all honesty, that it hurts every time I pass a construction site like this or a demolition site like this, seeing this huge waste of resources. The last few years have seen buildings pulled down everywhere. But since I've been living here, I've been walking past containers filled to the brim with the best parquet flooring, with the old double doors, with building culture in the truest sense, simply being successively torn out of the city every year, every month, every week, every day here, and taken to the garbage dumps and replaced by some standard doors, laminate flooring, or plastic windows. We have to stop this madness. It really can't go on like this. It can only be compared with the destruction that happened in Vienna during the 2 world wars. That was, if you look at it historically, an insane break, not only in our history, but, and this is important to understand, in our building culture, in the way we build and how we had been building up to that point. And this strand as an evolutionary development of building culture that has been passed on from generation to generation. On the one hand, this change and the necessity of rapid reconstruction have led to the emergence of completely new construction methods. But on the other hand, a great deal of building culture and knowledge has been lost. If you walk through the city now, you see a lot of these places where you realize that this has not been a continuous path of evolutionary development, but that there was a very strong break somewhere in between. I strongly believe that every construction method also generates a certain inner logic and certain ethics for handling the material. And I also believe, and this is the wonderful aspect of working with wood as a material, that it demands such a clarity of structure, thereby also a clarity of thought and design, and forces you to think things from the ground up and develop this clarity out of the material. I am convinced that this way of thinking and this way of dealing with wood not only enables us to offer solutions on how to implement it, but also to find a new approach to architecture in all other areas of planning and thinking. Because once I understand the semantics of this language, then, of course, I can apply it to any other function and to any other construction as well. Now I'd like to take a very brief leap away from Vienna across the pond to New York. At that time, as you can see here, it starts pretty much at the same point, at 0 in 1800, and goes up in a similarly steep curve as the figures for Vienna. New York was also one of the 4 largest cities alongside Vienna back then, and had a very rapid population growth at that time for the same or similar reasons as Vienna, but with completely different responses. There, the answer was steel construction. I'm using these examples deliberately, not because I think that's the right answer, of course, and not because I think Vienna should become New York. After all, 25 years ago, when I came to Vienna, there was the slogan of a regional party in Vienna: Vienna must not become Chicago. I don't think it was supposed to be New York either, but what we see here is again a reflection of history, namely that due to these pressures, the strong influx and the strong population expansion and associated new technologies, the cities have also completely changed in a way that would not have been considered at all possible before. This pressure enabled a completely different way of building, a completely different architectural language, and a completely different development. These changes were, on the one hand, the technologies and the material, and on the other hand, quite small and seemingly unrelated inventions such as the lift, which led to the possibility that one could suddenly build upwards, leading to the creation of these new architectural structures. Why I'm showing you this is because I really admire how people dealt with the challenges during that time. There are incredible drawings from the time and stories that explain how structures like that were built, like the Chrysler Building. Right to the end, there was this fight for who would build what was then the world's highest building, and how they could prefabricate the top there and push it out of the building from the inside at the end. Absolutely crazy. But yes, there was no effort spared, and the technical possibilities were there, so that everything was just feasible. That was absolutely fascinating. At the same time, however, there were evidently enough foolhardy people at the time who were also capable of completing it. You might think to yourself when you see today, wow, that does not quite meet health and safety guidelines, etc. But it seemed possible at the time, and it looks like there was a certain pride in the eyes of the people who built these buildings back then. Maybe we are not so far away from the situation we had back then. There are still reckless people today who do quite strange things. Perhaps the question is rather, how can we channel this energy and this recklessness in such a way that it can perhaps be used for more important things than a selfie at the top of a broadcast tower? That might be a question that I would put to you all. Let's come back to the development of Vienna briefly. We already saw this very strong development 100 years ago. Then there was a decrease in the number of inhabitants in several stages until the fall of the Iron Curtain. That is when the low point was reached. After that, it suddenly went steeply upwards again. And that is the situation we find ourselves in again now. That is, similar framework conditions as far as population expansion is concerned. And you can see that just by looking at the forecasts. These are the current figures projected to 2038. As you can see, it is precisely in the districts with the largest surface areas that growth is strongest. Here in a center where everything is already built up, there is naturally smaller growth. And if we look at it in more detail, then you see our building site right here, also in a very dark blue zone. So a lot will happen there in the next few years. At the same time, it must be said that certain things repeat themselves in the cycle of our life and history. Other things change in ways that we haven't seen before. Here you can see the concentration of different greenhouse gases over the last 2000 years. And if you look at that, then everyone notices that something has gone off course and something is happening here. I believe that this is actually only a symptom. It is not the actual problem, but a sign that in a certain way we have also forgotten to consider our principles at this point. We have thrown many of our basic principles overboard and have subjugated the earth in a way that may not be entirely good for it. And the result is that you know these figures. The construction industry alone is currently responsible for around 38% of CO2 emissions worldwide. It is similar with the grey energy and resources we need for that. Talking about resources, this is also very obvious. I was born pretty much right at the time when we were just able to make do with what the earth gave us. Since then, things have been going steadily downhill with one brief exception. We all know what that was about when we were slowed down in what we were doing for a short time. But in the meantime, we are at a point where, globally speaking, we need 1.7 Earth, or use what the Earth gives 1.7 times. And if we look at the individual countries, because we are of the opinion that we are always the good guys, we ride our bikes and we have green electricity. Unfortunately, we have to disappoint ourselves, because if you look at the global picture, then we see that this year we were already at the end of our resources on April the 6th. That is, in reality, the so-called developed world is still at only 1.7 Earth, because we only have great many countries that are even less developed and are balancing us out. That is how it is. That's why it's so important to demand a different way of thinking about our resources in the future. That means, on the one hand, making much more use of existing buildings, which is why I'm so happy about this project and these building developments, this use of existing buildings. But on the other hand, also thinking differently in planning. We are already trying to incorporate that into our design programs, and we don't just go in and say, well, let's start designing, but we always have projects in which resources are clearly limited, and we have to look at the situation the other way around. What am I able to do with what I have? And there again, it's so exciting to see the huge variety that can result from one and the same amount of material. Yes, here in this picture you can see some wood, but relatively little. That's the reality in most cases these days. At construction sites, the use of wood is not very common. I think we have to work very hard on that. But that's what has become the standard here over the last few decades.
imstande sind, dann mit dem
dismantling and enabling wood to achieve as much or even more than what is currently standard, to show that timber construction can be the answer. Because it has become clear that we as a society can no longer bear the collective future burden of the damage which this means of construction is causing to the environment by hiding behind profit to obscure it. And that's why I also believe that we have to rethink these methods urgently, because, and you can see this yourselves, if you look with very open eyes, in the last 10 years especially, the structures that are being torn down are becoming younger and younger. There are so many new buildings that are not even 20 years old, which I remember being built, and they are already being torn down again. I saw it in Stuttgart and I have seen it on Ausstellungsstraße. These buildings are only built to last for 20 years. It can't be right to demolish them already. Because we are now right at the point that we've been heading towards for the last 100 years. That we are generating huge mountains of waste that's being put into landfills now, where in 30 years people will probably say, for God's sake, what was wrong with you guys? How could you just throw all these resources away? People will literally start digging it all up again and look for precious metals, for copper, for usable materials that can be taken out of it. To bring this into some sort of perspective, when I started studying about 25 years ago, most of this was not an issue at all. So you can see how it can change within a relatively short time. I still remember when I started studying in Innsbruck at the time, I did my first timber construction project. I was in the fortunate position of having already planned and built my first timber house 5 years earlier. With a few people who had already built some things, we were meeting with the assistants and had to explain to them how timber construction details work. This was really still the beginning. The same happened with energy. Here we can see the evolution of average building standards just within the last, say, 50, 70 years. We are already quite good with our standards and with what we can implement. Most of our projects are in this exact area. But you can also see that as far as the energy consumption of the buildings is concerned, there is not much more that can be done. We've actually come quite a long way in that regard. What we have to look at in the future is how we construct our buildings, because if we put so much energy into our buildings that we can't compensate for it afterwards when we consume it, then the whole thing is quite simply pointless. If you look at this is now broken down to different traits or components. This is a typical solid construction. When I look at the CO2 emissions with a mixed construction method, metal method with the use of wooden elements, I can reduce the figure significantly. But if I actually build wooden buildings and use well-planned wooden constructions, then I am able to build completely CO2 neutral buildings. And I believe that must be the goal in the future. That is where we have to go, and that is also the direction in which we will carry out our teaching. This is also very much where your responsibility lies in the future. Namely, not to plan and then at some point say, yes, now we'll put a wooden facade on it, it's en vogue right now, it's very nice, looks good, I could give myself an ecological makeover. But rather the basic decisions of your actions should be made at the very beginning. What design principle and what material, that's where the lion's share of the decision is made. Everything that comes after that on surfaces and so on is peanuts. that is insignificant compared to the first decisions made at the beginning. And if we compare this with the last century and how the last century developed, even looking at present construction methods, I am convinced that we are at a point where we will be forced both technologically and ideologically to use these sustainable building materials. So that means renewable raw materials that have been given to us that we can use to create and construct without placing a lasting burden on the planet. There are now a number of these projects in the development stage or in the process of being built. I have chosen one example, this wooden straw house called Wood Scraper. Of course, you maybe can sense that we are keen on these quirky lighthouse projects. I think that's nice. I think it's good. But I think it's also important somehow as a symbol of perception. And we will also have to see to it that we broadly establish this perception that it is quite normal for these technologies to be used over a wide range of applications. Why does this make so much sense? Or why are the wood-based materials useful? Mr. Stralz has already anticipated that question, so I can go through it quickly. But a high degree of prefabrication is very important and is a key issue in urban areas. Let's move production to the factories, then there are only relatively short construction times on site, and the whole thing can be completed within a much shorter time. The dead weight of wood is also a very important issue, especially when adding stories. Also the excellent static properties which make it possible to build even very ornate structures. In addition, the very good fire protection properties that wood has in the event of fire. Earthquake safety, this will also become a more important issue in the future. Precise digital planning, I think this is actually another factor that will promote timber construction very strongly in this next century. That's also an invention of the last 20 years, and when it was invented, it almost totally replaced planning with a pen. I still learned that way in the 90s. We used ink pens for drawing, and during my studies at the end of the 90s, there was this upheaval. And as is always the case, when new technologies come along, you come in with something new, and first of all, you replace one thing right into the other. This is how these programs are still structured today. There are pens and layers, which are the former transparent papers that you put on top of each other and so on. But the possibilities there are now when I build a 3D model completely finished, and I can look at the thing from all sides, can look down under every joint at the base of support A, B, and see if the distance is 2 or 3 centimeters. Can then send the whole thing to the timber construction company, which takes it over, uses it for its joinery system. These are possibilities that we never had before. We just have to be able to use it accordingly. And in connection with this, of course, the low-dimensional tolerances. This is a completely different kind of building philosophy to what we knew before. And finally, of course, there is the climate-neutral construction, which I mentioned earlier and which is a major advantage. Finally, a few pictures where you can also see wood, simply as a small inspiration for what wonderful rooms you can make with it. And when you smell this wonderful building material on site, it is an absolute pleasure to walk through it. We will make sure that we go to construction sites a lot in our lessons to convey these qualities in this way as well. I think that's also quite important. That's why it's important to understand the possibilities that we have technically. And I think that's also very important so that you can plan properly and know what a machine is capable of creating and what the technologies behind it are. The same applies to prefabrication. Building has changed completely in the last 20 years. 20 years ago, when I started out, such companies were still a novelty. In the meantime, there is quite a good network of such plants, which are not only capable of prefabricating individual elements, but also of prefabricating entire rooms. We could talk about this for a long time too. It is just important to me how direct the connection is with what is created there at the end. And I think we could talk about the qualities of these rooms for a very long time. But these pictures speak for themselves. There is also the matter of constructing educational buildings. I think there are an incredible number of inspirational buildings where you can see how the whole thing works, even examples in wood. And even in Vienna, there are already some finished examples that will help you look to the future with joy. Or look at this example here in Linz with this addition of a story with a very modern answer to this issue of extending buildings. Well, I'm finished with my presentation and wish all participants lots of fun with the projects. And now I'd like to hand you back to Katharina. Thanks. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Professor Treu. Sehr interessant.
Thank you very much, Professor Treu. That was very interesting. So, wood is nothing new in urban building culture, and standardized construction is not a modern invention either. What is new are the very innovative, technologically advanced products for wood construction and technologies, as we have just seen. The next contribution comes from our chair of the jury, Katharina Bayer. Katharina Bayer is an architect with an architectural office in Vienna, 1:1 Architektur, which has already completed several very interesting timber buildings. She was also an external lecturer here at the University of Technology of Vienna and at the Institute of Structural Engineering. Unfortunately, she cannot physically be with us today due to health reasons, but will join us via our digital platform and describe the competition, the jury, and the specifications for the competition. Here she is, the chair of our jury. Hello. Mrs. Bayer. Hello. Hi, everybody. A very good morning to all of you. Can you hear me well? Yes, everything is working fine. We can see you, we can hear you, and are eager to hear what you have to say. All right, I'm going to try sharing my screen and we'll see if that works technically. Do you see my screen now?
So, dann einen herzlichen guten Morgen eben auch von meiner Seite. Es tut mir sehr leid, dass ich nicht physisch anwesend sein kann. Leider.
Yes, wonderful. So then, good morning, everybody. I'm very sorry that I cannot be with you in person. Unfortunately, I have a serious cold and I am not able to socialize today. Many thanks to the organizers and the technicians for nevertheless making it possible for me to present the tasks of the competition to you personally. That was very important for me today. First of all, I would like to thank you very much for the invitation to chair the jury for the Student Trophy 2024. I have already briefly been introduced. We also work very much with wood in practice, increasingly with wood, mainly in residential construction and also in Vienna and Germany. I hope to be able to bring a practical perspective to the jury as well. My task today is to present the tasks to you again. I would like to start off with a brief introduction, so to speak, before we kind of go through it together. Much has already been said by the previous speakers about the challenges we face, so I won't go into it any further. The fundamentals of some of these challenges will also be addressed in the Student Trophy 2024. On the other hand, there is the issue of the growing city and the still rising world population. That means we will continue to have growing cities and metropolitan areas. In contrast to some colleagues who think the world is already built and we don't have to build more, essentially we're going to need additional infrastructure and buildings to be able to meet the growing demand. On the other hand, of course, there is the challenge that land as a resource cannot be increased and that we have to move closer together, so to speak, also in the cities. This is why redensification and the reuse of structures that are no longer in use are a key issue. We are in the middle of a climate crisis and also have to consider how to build in the future. Climate neutrality has already been mentioned by Juri Treu and will be the major challenge for building in the future. The construction industry is responsible for almost 40% of greenhouse gas emissions, and we will have to learn very quickly how to construct climate-neutral buildings. Wood can make a special contribution to this, and is actually one of the essential solutions for climate-neutral construction. I can report from our offices that there is a lot of work going on to define CO2 budgets for new buildings, for example. This means that we have set ourselves the goal of being climate neutral in Austria by 2040. So we still have a certain quota of CO2 emissions that we can emit by then. But in order to identify this target, as it were, we are currently working very hard to find out, for example, how much CO2 per square meter I can actually consume in a new building. This is very complicated and difficult to define. The fact is that it has to be close to zero, because we have set ourselves the goal of zero emissions or climate neutrality. But we are still a long way from achieving climate neutrality in a new construction, as well as in renovation and refurbishment. This is also very much related to how we build, namely still very little with renewable resources and still very much with building materials that emit a lot of CO2, such as cement. So here is a comparison. 1 cubic meter of wood binds 1 ton of CO2. 1 cubic meter of cement causes 800 kilograms of CO2. That means that wood will certainly be an important building material of the future, and the student trophy addresses precisely this topic. But unfortunately, it is not yet the reality as far as I can observe. Juri Treu has already made a nice historical outline. How we build is always a reflection of our society and the technical possibilities, and I have brought an example from Vienna. Not far from the framework area of the student trophy is the Sonnwendviertel area at Vienna's new main railway station, former railroad land, that is to say the classic inner city brownfield development redensification in the city. In recent years, as you can see here, around 5,500 apartments have been built around the park. I lived there, we also built there, so I have watched it very closely, and I can say that of these 5,500 apartments, only about 100 apartments were built in wood. This means that although we have all the technical possibilities, although there is also an urgency to build urban with alternative building materials in the city, we are still a long way from implementing this quantitatively. And again, the challenges have already been addressed. It is a lack of knowledge and it is also a lack of structures. In fact, when it comes to implementation, we often lack the companies that can also build these structures. In the future, we have to work on not only growing qualitatively, as it were, a great deal has already been done, but also on expanding quantitatively with wood construction and other bio-based and geo-based building materials in the city. These are the houses we built there. One of these 3 wooden houses is the health quarter. This is a privately financed housing more in the high-end segment. There, it is often easier to implement such alternative building materials simply because the budgets are higher and the quality requirements are different. We work very much in subsidized housing, for example, and there are simply limited costs there. This is why I am pleased that we have nevertheless managed to implement the Gleis 21 building group, subsidized residential building, a building group project in timber construction in the Sonnenwendviertel. In the Sonnenwendviertel, the focus was always on mixed structure, that is to say a mixture of uses, which is also part of the task of the student trophy, and a special challenge in timber construction in terms of sound insulation, static properties, etc. We have learned a lot in this project, which should contain a lot of flexibility for this participation of the users, and have developed some things here to make this possible. Here are a few more impressions of the project. I don't want to go into it in too much detail. If you are in Vienna, you might as well check this out along with the building sites. These 3 buildings here, the 3rd building, which was constructed in wood, is also a building group project by architect Reinberg, Bikes and Rails. I believe all 3 buildings are actually wood hybrid buildings. I'm not sure about Bikes and Rails. That means that not all components are purely wooden structures. This often has to do with sound insulation and other fire protection requirements, which is why this is not yet possible in its pure form or only with very increased effort, but it is increasingly moving in the direction of pure timber construction solutions in dense building. Now I would like to move on to the task of the project. As I said, I come from a practical background. It is very important to me to bring this practical perspective into the jury and to ensure that we not only think in terms of wood, but also in terms of demand. That is, even in timber construction, it is about finding solutions that support the use. I believe that these are the main challenges that the tasks pose here. Wooden City is the name of this year's competition, and I think it was called that last year as well. This is an open competition for students. You already know all of this. I assume that most have already read the specifications. That is why I would just like to give you a brief outline and summary. I think there's also an opportunity for questions afterwards. It is an international competition that has also been said. The 3 exemplary building sites are all located in Vienna in the 10th district and are intended to show the potential and possibilities of modern timber construction in urban areas. It intends to continue building the city and to show the potential for inner city additions and consolidation with the building material wood. That means that these building sites are all located in densely built up areas, and it is really a question here of building with several stories, of building on existing structures, of creating new space, and of making do with as few resources as possible. And of course, it is always a matter of creating added value, not only in the building itself, but also for the surroundings, for the urban fabric in which these buildings are located. That is a particular concern of mine, so that thinking here does not stop at the building site boundary, but that an analysis of the surroundings also takes place. Even if we can't come to Vienna now, I think there are a lot of digital opportunities today to explore the environment well. I will present the building sites in more detail at the end. Here is already an overview. The framework area is located in Vienna's 10th district, south of Matzleinsdorfer Platz, which is actually not a square but a traffic junction, which is probably why you haven't found it in the aerial photo yet. It is actually hidden under the railroad. To the west, the area is sharply bordered by the Klinik Favoriten Hospital and Triesterstraße, one of the main exit roads from Vienna to the south. It is an area built at the classic Viennese block edge. The 10th district is a former workers' district and still strongly characterized by production. And this is reflected in the building sites. One task involves the addition to a factory building, for example. There are 3 building sites, 3 themes. I like that there are quite different tasks. This means that everyone can pick out their special interests here. On the one hand, there is the extension of a school building at the southernmost building site. Then there is the addition of a block edge, actually a gap in the building structure that is to be filled with a new building, and the addition of stories to an existing building, a former factory building. There is a lot of documentation available on this. You can find them all on the proHolz website. Here's briefly what you can find there: the logo, the template for the project poster that you should submit, a description of these competition objects, and a lot of planning material as a basis for project planning. If there are any questions, and I have heard they are already coming in, then contact proHolz. I have the contacts also in my presentation. It is very nice, as has already been said today, that timber construction is teamwork. It's not like we as architects are making the decisions alone, working alone, and going to the engineer afterwards and asking and how does it hold now. It is an interdisciplinary and itinerant collaboration from the beginning. This is also reflected in the jury, which on the one hand represents the architectural community here through Thomas Hasler, who is also a professor at the Technical University. I don't know if he is present today. Unfortunately, I cannot see you, but otherwise nice greetings. I, as an external architect, not coming from the university and perhaps a bit more firmly rooted in Viennese practice, am pleased to take over the chair. With Gordian Clay, we have a representative of one of the leading engineering firms on the subject of timber construction in Austria. So I am very pleased that we have such a strong lineup here. Another member of the jury is Christoph Weisenseer, who headed the project that I have shown. We implemented it in 2021 with Weisenseer Holzsystembau. He is a timber construction contractor coming from practice, who really brings in the view from the construction side the production, and not only from practice, but from innovative practice. He is certainly someone who is very open to innovation and further development and stands for it. And last but not least, Silvia Boleres from Holzforschung Austria brings the perspective of research and teaching to the jury. I think in this constellation we will be able to look at, evaluate and discuss the projects comprehensively very well. I always enjoy being on juries because you actually learn a lot there. It is a kind of further training for me every time, and also an important discourse in architecture, where we have the opportunity to discuss different solution approaches comparatively with each other and to show advantages and disadvantages and potential.
Ja, die Beurteilungskriterien sind immer sehr allgemein gehalten, aber auch wichtig, sozusagen sich daran zu orientieren. Es geht natürlich um Architektur.
The evaluation criteria are always very general, but it is also important to be guided by them. Of course, it's about architectural quality, it's about building culture, that has also been said today. Timber construction is not only a technical solution, but it is also a challenge and requirement in terms of a building culture that we are facing here. It's not just about the building itself, but always about the interaction with the surrounding urban space. No building stands on its own, and of course it also has to fit in well with its surroundings, even with a new material, and that is perhaps what makes this interaction very exciting. The quality of the use of space is very important. That is the functional structure of the project. How are the spaces organized? Are they of high quality? Are they well lit? Are they easy to use? All these questions are important and relevant. Functionality of the construction has already been said today, so do not think timber construction at the end, but rather from the beginning. Constructing and developing from the possibilities of timber construction is one of the central tasks of the student trophy. And having the topic of climate protection also be represented here in the assessment criteria means that it is not about using as much wood as possible or other materials. It is a matter of handling these resources very economically and rationally, of using them very efficiently and in a targeted manner, and also of considering how they can be optimized in the future, because we only have limited resources at our disposal. Wood too is a renewable resource, but a slow-growing one, and it must be used very consciously and economically. The jury procedure is two-stage. You submit your projects, then there will be a pre-selection in the first round, and then in the final jury session, one winning project and 2 recognitions will be awarded per building site. The winning projects are also endowed with 3,000 euros and the recognitions with 1,000 euros. The participation criteria are known, I think. Students of architecture and civil engineering can participate, and important and good from my point of view, teams should be formed, and that means at least 2 students should work together. But if possible, interdisciplinary teams should be formed, which ideally combine the different planning areas, such as structural design, fire protection, building services, engineering, etc. The more practical your approach to this task, the more you will be able to draw from it, and the better the work will be. The submission documents must all be submitted digitally. On the website there is the possibility of an upload. There are various documents to be submitted. You can also find this in detail in the invitation to tender. Here I only want to present them as an overview. There are details of the project to be provided directly on the website. The project description is to be uploaded to project posters per project, and that may be quite specific. We can't gather all the models here, but in order to be able to record the projects better in 3D and that they can also be presented by you personally, you are required to make a presentation video with the architectural model. The length should not exceed 4 minutes, and in it you should explain your design project using the model. This video then serves us, the jury, as the basis for our evaluation in addition to the planning material. Dates. Here is an overview. Today we have the kickoff event at the Vienna Technical University. The next step will then be the submission of your work by March the 1st next year. As I said, all digitally via upload on proHolz.at. Please note the exact time. It says 11:59 p.m. So you can really upload your work until the last minute of the day. The jury meeting will then take place on April the 18th, and I hope to see you again on May 29 at the Vienna Technical University for the award ceremony.
konkrete Rückfragen gibt, stehen verschiedene Kanäle zur Verfügung.
As I said, if there are specific queries, various channels are available. These can also be found on the proHolz website. Siglinde Vega is also here at the Technical University today. There are also direct contact persons for international students who are available to answer questions. Take the opportunity to ask questions. If anything is unclear, if questions arise, it is definitely important to go into the task without questions.
Abschließend jetzt noch die 3 Bauplätze im Überblick.
And finally, I would like to present the 3 building sites at a glance. I'm sure some of you have already visited the building sites. The good thing is they are all very close to each other. That is, you can look at them in one go. Here again are the 3 building sites colored in red. Site 1 addresses the very issue of school expansion. It is located on Knöllgasse. The red shaded area is the one that can be built on. The front is the existing building, and the area that can be built on is about 3,000 square meters. There is a very precise specification here, of course. As in school building construction, there is a spatial program that must be implemented. That is why this location also has the most specifications in terms of space and functional program. It is an existing primary school with 430 children in an openly managed school. Openly managed means, please correct me if I'm wrong, that there is a full day teaching here, which means interleaving, free time and teaching interleaved. That means that the children really spend the whole day in school. This is also important for the task. This is not just a building for learning, but also a building for spending time there, for playing, etc. Now, an extension of the location is to be planned to include a secondary school. The existing primary school is for 6 to 10-year-old children, and after primary school, children have the possibility of attending a general secondary school or a grammar school. So we are talking about a school for children aged 10 to 14, and for these pupils an extension is planned here. It is, of course, also about contemporary pedagogical concepts. This is state-of-the-art in school construction. Our existing schools are very often still schools that are functionally and rationally structured and offer little opportunity to spend time, to meet, to learn together, and they represent a front-of-class teaching and were more disciplinary institutions than institutions that promote personal development. Contemporary pedagogical concepts also mean completely different spatial requirements and completely different opportunities for encounters. It is also necessary to integrate other change requirements, as already mentioned, because the children really spend the whole day here. Afternoon care takes place on site, and learning in small groups should also be made possible by the architecture. However, it is important for all 3 building sites to show the advantages of using wood as a building material for schools. In school construction, of course, we have different room sizes, spans, and therefore also different requirements for timber construction for the structure. And, of course, it is always a matter of making the wood and the atmosphere tangible, and also a matter of considering the topic of prefabrication.
Ja, hier nochmal im Detail, also 3.300 Quadratmeter Nutzfläche sollen ergänzt werden. Es geht darum, dieses zusätzliche Gebäude.
So, here again in detail, 3,300 square meters of usable space is to be added. It is a matter of connecting this new additional building with the existing building in terms of space. So the stairs, the connections have to be taken into account, as well as spatial flexibility in both directions. This means that it is also really a matter of the primary school being able to make good use of the new premises and also benefit from them. There is a line route at the building site which may only be built over from a height of 4 meters. This, of course, is also an important note. Perhaps it is even less often the case for you as a student, but in practice there are often many limiting factors that also restrict the design options. That's why I think it's good that this is also mentioned here, and this is turned into reality where exactly such requirements shape the design. The functional structure is also shown again. I'll show it in a functional organization chart in a moment. Of course, on the one hand, it is about classrooms that should be grouped around common areas. A standard sports hall, a dining room, communal and break areas are to be integrated because of course movement areas and open spaces are very important for the primary and secondary school. We are building in the open space of the primary school, so to speak. This means that here too it is important to restore open spaces for the primary school, and optionally, I would say optionally if there are restrictions, but it is an important matter. Since COVID, we have known this, to integrate outdoor classes for making outdoor learning possible. A library and reading zone and a multipurpose room are to be integrated. From my point of view, these are important functions that should be integrated if possible. Perhaps due to the limited space, one has to weigh whether it is possible, but I think multiple uses, etc., can also offer solutions. You should always plan all your projects economically and functionally. They should offer sensible development areas, but also qualitative development areas, and should take into account issues such as accessibility, escape routes, and fire protection. Here you can see the spatial and functional program, which you can then look at in more detail. The aim is to create a common center, a place to meet and to strengthen togetherness, and then to arrange this functional program around this common center. There are many more pictures of building site 1 on the website. I have integrated a few impressions in my presentation. You can see the existing building and temporary additions, which are to be ignored, as I saw in the task definition. Not to be ignored are the existing trees, perhaps. I hope they are evident in the plans. Large trees in the city are, of course, something very valuable. If you want to create high-quality open spaces, which you need in the school, this is certainly best achieved if efforts are made in the design to preserve the existing trees to a large extent. Vienna also has a tree protection law, which means that a tree may not simply be cut down. If a tree is cut, replacement plantings must be made, and that is not so easy in a densely built-up area. Please treat the future building material wood with care and use the climate effect of the trees for the open spaces.
Die Ergänzung im Blockrand, also heißt natürlich bauen in der Stadt, aber
let's come to building site 2, the addition at the block edge. That means building in a city, of course, but also building new structures in the city. Continue building, so to speak, existing structures. The address is Inzersdorfer Straße 100, and here we have a buildable area of about 2,000 square meters. In case land is available in the city, it is very often dedicated to housing. I say housing is the essence of the city, the largest amount that makes up built-up space and therefore also shapes our cities and where there is the greatest need for in growing cities. That's why I'm glad that the issue of housing is also addressed in the task definition, as is the issue of affordable housing. This means that it's not only about providing high-quality housing, but also making it affordable and accessible to everyone from an economic point of view. This is a building volume of around 6,000 square meters of usable space, where at least 4 stories should be added. You can check what can be integrated while here. it is certainly not a bad idea to integrate even more stories. After all, the adjacent structures are structures from the Wilhelminian time. This means that the surrounding buildings often have very high floor heights. In new buildings, it is often possible to add one story more with reduced floor heights. So it also has to be weighed up at the same time how high the building can be, how high it should be, how much living space is appropriate and can be integrated well. We are not talking about a purely residential building. The site is located in a densely built-up urban area, which means that the base should also integrate other uses, such as premises for retail and commercial uses. And in any case, these uses should offer added value for the residents themselves in terms of work and infrastructure, and also act as a connecting point for the surrounding neighborhood. Here we may need other room heights or other requirements, so that is perhaps also part of the task. Creating qualitative open spaces is, of course, very important here as well. Living also means staying there and taking account of the quality of stay for small children, for example, who are not yet able to move freely in the urban space. That means who are dependent on high-quality open spaces directly at their doorstep. This must be taken into account under the aspect that it is noisy all around and there are streets around. The aim is to create protected, qualitatively well-usable open spaces around them. There is an obligation to create annexes to existing buildings. It is about closing that block. Here again, a few impressions of the neighboring and adjacent buildings. I think the building with the firewall is on Gußriegelstraße. On the buildable ground, there are single-story buildings. I think you can ignore those, but you can also integrate them if you find approaches to do so. I think it's up to you how you do that. Let's come to the third task, the addition of stories, also a very important and worthwhile task, I think, which reflects the theme of redensification in the city very well. Often existing buildings are not so high. There is a high densification potential upwards in the city, and also to redesign this roof as the fifth facade and to offer open spaces here. These are all issues that are reflected in the theme of adding stories. This task is about adding stories to a former tobacco sleeve factory, which is also very symbolic of the 10th district, perhaps, since this is a factory building. The task is to add at least 2 stories and 2,000 square meters of usable space here. Here too it is important to weigh up how much is tolerable and how much is possible. Of course, we want to use building sites as much as possible, but we don't want to restrict quality. The functions in the existing building are to be retained. There's a local grocery store and a further education facility. The addition of stories is about a flexible mixed type of a cluster and studio living. I think there's also a definition what cluster and studio living means. It is living and working in a communal structure. Of course, it is important to integrate private open spaces. This also applies to the previous building task. And because there is no ground area available that we can use, it is very important to think about the roof as an open space, as a potential use, and to consider how this roof area can be used for communal uses and as an open space. It is a question of appropriate distribution of the construction volume, of course. So with any addition of stories, the question is what is tolerable? I think it is not a restriction for you what is possible under building law. So just check the existing building stock and what integrates well into the city. Also here at building site 3, there are development areas. It's about the good integration of the development into the existing building and to create qualitative development areas. Vienna actually has a very high tradition in high quality development spaces, higher than perhaps in other countries. We are familiar with very generous, beautiful, often lit, communicative development spaces that date from the Wilhelminian time. And I think we should continue to build following this tradition. The development areas are also meeting spaces, and this must be taken into account. Accessibility, escape routes, and fire protection are also important topics here. And perhaps it is even a bit more challenging to find good solutions in this regard when adding stories. Here are a few more impressions of the third building site. Again, there are many more photos online. And of course, you can take a closer look on Google Maps, a street view, or directly on site. You can see here the former factory, a beautiful building with 3.5 stories, which can certainly form a good basis atmospherically for your creative further development. And last but not least, I would like to give you the advice to also look at references and examples. Ms. Vega told me to include some references in my presentation. I have deliberately not done that. This is because I don't want to highlight individual projects, because it's a matter of considering what the goals of the design task are, and from the location and the task first considering where I want to go, and on the other hand, of course, also getting inspiration from existing examples of timber construction and then bringing that together. I don't want to influence you too much. There is a very good database of exemplary wooden buildings, international examples, which can also be filtered by category, where you can get inspiration and information about building with wood. Take advantage of these opportunities, but also don't let them limit your own creativity. So continuing to build also means thinking beyond what already exists. In this sense, I look forward to your projects. Wish you a lot of fun and a lot of joy in working on your projects. Lots of success, and I hope we will see each other in person at the award ceremony in May. Thank you. Many thanks to Katharina Bayer for the interesting explanations and advice on the competition. To conclude today's kickoff event, I would like to make 2 organizational remarks. The recording of the event and the presentations will be online shortly. Also, the registration form for the competition will be accessible online shortly. At the same time as registering, you can upload your project documents. The submission deadline is March the 1st, 11:59 p.m. We are so meticulous about this deadline because there were questions about it in the course of the last competition. So everything will be available online. Also, registration will be possible soon online if you already want to register as a team. With regard to questions, the tasks, the competition, and so on, we are already receiving questions, specific questions about the project specifications, etc. Our proposal and guideline are as follows. The best would be to send questions via email to me, so that all questions are collected at one point. Please do so by October the 31st. We will then put all questions and answers online so that they are equally accessible to everyone and that everyone who participates in the competition is in the same starting position, having all additional questions and answers. Urgent questions can also be asked now, but please ask very specific questions about the competition in writing, because then we can provide the answers to all colleagues. If you have any urgent questions, you may ask them now. Yes, Professor Treu would like to say something. I would like to take the opportunity to ask a question that I think is essential for everyone, because Katharina mentioned that the projects should be feasible and practical, and that you should use as much freedom as possible. So my question is simply, to what extent are building law and development plan specifications binding, and to what extent can they be interpreted more freely? The proHolz Student Trophy is an international competition. Therefore, you don't have to adhere 100% to national or local building specifications. Of course, you have to stay within a certain logical framework in terms of construction heights, fire protection, and so on. The building specifications are similar in all countries. However, you do not have to adhere 100% to the building regulations in Vienna or the OIB guidelines in any case. What is important is simply a rational design. And since we are still in the student area here, we want to give the thoughts and also the planning a little more freedom. So please plan sensibly, but also develop inspired projects then. Are there any further questions? Yes, there was a question back there. Please go ahead. I have a question that concerns the issue of parking and mobility, which is a problem, of course, dealing with the addition of stories and if there are more residents on site. How should that be handled? Or is this to be ignored? Or especially with this block edge, is it allowed to create underground parking or something similar, or is it rather not planned? Underground parking may well be created, especially at building site 2, it is possible and feasible. Regarding mobility in the city. Moving in the city, in the streets, we can feel that mobility in the city is undergoing a change. This means that this task is also to be considered according to the new building code for Vienna. For example, the obligation to provide enough parking spaces is reduced. For various reasons, we will have to make better use of spaces in the city than just to use them for parking motorized vehicles, because it's not only about the available spaces in the city, but also about finders development or energy consumption. So please also plan sensibly here too. It is certainly not the priority of the competition to consider or plan parking spaces, but very much desired are thoughts on alternative means of transport and mobility concepts in the city. As we can see here, the building sites are located in a very densely built-up district in Vienna. So please provide your suggestions. For example, you can propose vehicle sharing systems instead of fixed parking spaces. There are great bicycles, even e-bikes these days, or other vehicles to get around. And walking is supposed to be healthy. So that's the direction you should go. Thank you.